Continuing our lesson on exponential notation, we're going to change gears a little bit, and we're just not going to be so concerned on writing it writing it in exponential notation or an expanded or standard form, but we're going to try to decipher what type of answers we're going to have. And here's what I mean by that. Look at exercise 11. It says, will these products, product remember is the answer to a multiplication problem, be positive or negative? And then we'll come back to the how do you know. So if you look here, let's talk and try to remember our multiplication rules for negative numbers. If I were to go -1 times a -1, negative times a negative is a +1. But what if I do that 3 times? -1 times -1, notice I'm not using the x here, that's fine, times -1. Well, a negative times a negative is a positive, times another negative is going to be a negative. Or, if I do it 4 times, negative times a negative is a positive, times a negative would be a negative, times another negative would be a positive. Or 5 times. -1 times a -1, this is +1. Even if you thought of this as a -1 times a -1, that's a +1. +1 times a +1 is a +1, times a -1 will be negative. So what I want to point out here is that notice when we get our positive answer right here, over here there was 1, 2 bases. Here there's 1, 2, 3, 4 bases. Notice both of these are an even number of, well, the repeated multiplication is an even number. Whereas down here, 1, 2, 3, we got an odd solution. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we got a negative solution. I should say negative, not odd. I apologize. Okay, so what this should tell us, it says, will these products be positive or negative? We got to focus on how many times are we multiplying the -1 by itself. 12, okay? 12 is even. 12 is an even number. So that means that the product is going to be positive. Okay. And I'm going to get into this how do you know part here in the next one. Okay, and I'll kind of show you what I expect for a solution. So you don't have to do all this work. If you look at this next one, we have -1 times itself 13 times, or rewritten as -1 to the 13th power. Notice that the number 13 is odd. So if you took a -1 and multiplied by itself 13 times, that's an odd number of -1s. So we can say that, will these products be positive or negative? They're going to be negative. And our how do you know is the exponent is odd. And really that how do you know, pay attention to that in your homework, it really is that easy. So looking at a few more examples here, is it necessary to do all the calculations to determine the sign of the product? Hopefully you're thinking no, all we need to focus on is the exponent. Now notice these aren't using a base of -1. Does that matter? No, because remember, the rules for negatives doesn't matter what the base is. -5 times a -5, that's going to be a +25. Okay? So, is it necessary to do them? No. This is an odd number. I'm sorry, it is an odd number. It's an odd exponent. Therefore, I know my product will be negative. Whereas this one here, even though it's a -1.8 as a decimal, if we're going to multiply -1.8 by itself 122 times, that's even. And even exponent means your solution is going to be positive. So, continuing with those thoughts, Fill in the blanks indicating whether the number is positive or negative. You got to be careful what you read here. If n, where's n? It's right here. If it is a positive even number, even, okay? Remember, even gives us a positive solution. Don't overthink it. Same thing here. If it's a positive odd number, if this n right here is odd, odd is going to give us a negative solution. Okay, so don't overthink those. It's really understanding exponential notation and really our rules of multiplying negative numbers. Last example. Josie says that negative 15 times itself 6 times equals negative 15 to the 6th. Is she correct, and how do you know? Well, if I pause for a second, you might think that, well, yeah, we're multiplying by itself 6 times, so that is negative 15 to the 6th. But if you remember way back at the beginning of the lesson, anytime you have a fraction or a negative base, you have to put it in parentheses. And this right here is not in parentheses. So, is she correct? Well, it's kind of a technicality, but it's a big one. It's important. We would say no. It should be negative 15 to the 6 with negative 15 in parentheses. Again, it's just a little thing, but it makes a big difference so we don't lose those negatives as they go floating around, or, maybe get a little not neat about it. Okay, fractions or negatives, they need to be in parentheses when you're writing it in exponential notation.